William Turner was 68 years old, a man whose hands were shaped by decades of hard work. With short, graying hair and deep lines on his face that told the stories of a life well lived, he looked every bit the part of the retired mechanic who had spent his youth and adulthood fixing cars in a small-town auto shop. The creaky door of his garage had become a familiar sound to the residents of Fairview, a quiet town where everyone knew everyone else's business. For over 40 years, William had been the man people turned to when their engines sputtered or their brakes failed. He was good at it, and he had taken pride in his work. But for William, there was always something more. He had never spoken much about it, but as a young boy, he had been fascinated by history, by the great empires of the past, the wars that shaped nations, and the thinkers who changed the course of civilization. He dreamed of becoming a historian, traveling the world to uncover hidden stories of the past. But life, as it often does, had different plans. When William was just 18, his father fell ill, and William was forced to leave his studies to help his family. He quickly found work at the auto shop, and though he loved working with his hands, part of him always wondered how different his life might have been had he followed that dream. He had long ago let go of the idea of becoming a historian, telling himself that dreams like that were for younger people, for those with the luxury of time and resources. Marriage and children followed, and William's focus shifted entirely to his family. His wife, Margaret, and their two children, James and Lucy, were his world. As the years passed, William poured everything into providing for them, and he never looked back at the dream that once burned so brightly inside him. His life was full, though not in the way he had once imagined. His children grew up, left home, and started their own families, and now, William found himself with more time on his hands than ever before. Retirement was supposed to be the reward for a lifetime of hard work, but for William, it felt like a quiet echo of the life he had lived. Mornings were spent in the garden, afternoons in front of the television, and evenings playing cards with the neighbors. It was comfortable, but in the silence between the hours, a nagging thought often crept into his mind: what if I had done more with my life? What if I had followed that dream? It wasn't that he regretted his choices, he loved his family, and he was proud of the work he had done, but the weight of that unfulfilled ambition lingered. Sometimes, while walking through the small-town library, he would find himself pausing in front of the history section, running his fingers over the spines of books about ancient civilizations or World War II. He would pick one up, flip through the pages, and feel the tug of something he had long buried. History was still his passion, and yet, the thought of pursuing it now, at his age, seemed ridiculous. "It's too late," he would think, setting the book down with a sigh. William Turner had spent his whole life fixing things, cars, engines, and broken parts of his community. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still one thing he hadn't fixed: his own heart, yearning for the life he had put on hold. As a child, William had always been captivated by the stories of the past. History books, dusty and forgotten in the attic, had been his earliest escape. He would spend hours flipping through pages filled with tales of ancient Rome, the grand pyramids of Egypt, and the rise and fall of empires that had shaped the world as he knew it. He would often imagine himself as part of those stories, walking alongside the great leaders, uncovering lost secrets, and piecing together the mysteries of civilizations long gone. His fascination with history didn't stop with the pages of books. On weekends, young William would wander through local museums, staring in awe at the old artifacts that seemed to hold secrets of a time long past. The smell of old parchment, the delicate carvings on ancient stone, the intricate maps, everything about history seemed to call to him. But, like many dreams in life, it was a passion that had no room to grow. At 18, when he graduated from high school, William's future was clear in his mind, though not in the way he had envisioned. His father fell seriously ill, and William knew there was no choice but to stay home and help with the family business. He had hoped to attend university, to dive deeper into history, and perhaps one day travel to distant lands to study firsthand the places he had only read about. But those plans were soon replaced by reality, the pressing needs of the family and the looming responsibility of taking over the auto shop. It wasn't easy for William to let go of his dream, but life had a way of pushing forward, regardless of his hopes. As the years passed, history books gave way to repair manuals, and the grand visions of archaeology and academic debates were replaced with the steady rhythm of tools clinking and engines roaring. He still found himself drawn to history, but the books were tucked away on high shelves, collecting dust as he worked to keep food on the table and ensure his children had what they needed to succeed. He had a family to care for, a business to run. His dream of studying history seemed selfish, impractical, and increasingly distant. Marriage to Margaret and the birth of their 2 children, James and Lucy, only added to the weight of responsibility. He watched them grow, and as they began to make their own paths in life, William felt a subtle pang of regret for the dreams he had abandoned. But he never voiced it. Instead, he threw himself into his work, always putting the needs of others before his own. He convinced himself that it was too late for him to pursue anything different. His chance had passed. The years went on, and the passing of time slowly buried his dream deeper and deeper until it was little more than a whisper in his mind. He would often glance at the history section in the library, or hear a story on the news about a new archaeological discovery, and for a brief moment, the flame of his old passion would spark. But the reality of his life, the people he had cared for, the choices he had made, kept him tethered firmly to the present. Maybe in another life, he would think, setting aside the history book and moving on to whatever task lay before him. His dream of becoming a historian was just a story now, a story of a man who had dreams, but never found the time to chase them. Still, the dream never completely vanished. It lingered like a shadow, always there, reminding him of what could have been. And though he never spoke of it to anyone, William carried the quiet sadness of an abandoned dream with him every day. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when the catalyst for change arrived in William's life, though at the time, he had no idea how much it would alter the course of his days. He was sitting on his porch, sipping his afternoon coffee as the sun cast its warm glow over the garden. Margaret was inside, sorting through the mail, when she came out with an envelope that caught her eye. "William, you might want to see this," she said, handing him a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't the usual assortment of bills or advertisements. It was something different, an invitation of sorts. William opened the envelope with the same casual curiosity he had when dealing with most mail. Inside was a glossy brochure for a local university's lifelong learning program, and at the center of the material was a large, bold title, "Pursue Your Passion, No Age is Too Late." The brochure outlined courses in history, literature, and even archaeology, designed specifically for older adults. It promised an enriching experience, no grades, no pressure, just the joy of learning something new, something you had always wanted to explore. William stared at the brochure for a moment, his heart skipping a beat. The words "no age is too late" echoed in his mind, louder than any other thought. He'd never imagined that something like this existed, an opportunity to return to school, not as a traditional student, but as someone who could finally explore history without the constraints of his earlier life. For a brief moment, he felt a rush of excitement, like a long-dormant fire had been kindled inside him. Margaret noticed his expression. "What is it, William?" she asked, her voice warm with curiosity. He looked at her, then back at the brochure, and for the first time in years, the thought of pursuing history didn't seem impossible. He realized that, for once, it wasn't about a diploma or career advancement, it was about something much simpler. It was about passion, learning, and fulfilling a dream he had buried long ago. "I don't know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've always wanted to study history, to really learn about it. But I don't know if it's foolish at my age." Margaret smiled gently, sitting beside him. "William, you've always said that life is about learning. If this is something you really want, why not go for it? It's never too late to start something new." Her words resonated deep within him. Could it really be true? Could he, after all these years, finally do what he had once dreamed of? For so long, he had told himself it was too late, that dreams were for younger people, for those with the luxury of time. But now, this brochure seemed to say otherwise. It wasn't about age or limitations, it was about reigniting a passion he had long suppressed. That evening, as he sat in the quiet of his home, William couldn't shake the thought of what he had just discovered. He couldn't stop thinking about the chance to finally immerse himself in the subject he had always loved. He imagined walking into a classroom, surrounded by others who shared his interest in history, no longer held back by the demands of daily life or the weight of responsibilities that had kept him grounded for so long. The more he thought about it, the more the excitement grew. Maybe this was the sign he had been waiting for, the sign that it wasn't too late after all. But even as the spark of hope began to kindle, he felt the old doubts creeping back in. "What if I'm not good enough?" he thought. "What if I'm too old to keep up with younger students?" Still, deep down, William knew that this opportunity wasn't one to pass up. The brochure, the invitation, Margaret's words, it was all leading him to this moment of decision. And with a quiet resolve, William made up his mind. The next day, he would call the university and sign up for the history course. The following morning, William woke up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The invitation from the university was still sitting on the kitchen counter, its glossy surface reflecting the light as though it had a glow of its own. He had looked at it again before going to bed, the words "pursue your passion" still dancing in his mind. For the first time in a long while, he felt something more than the usual routine: excitement, curiosity, and even a little nervousness. As he sipped his morning coffee, William felt an unfamiliar wave of uncertainty. The quiet of the house, the chirping of birds outside, seemed to magnify the stillness within him. He hadn't made a big decision like this in years. His life had been a series of small, practical choices: taking care of his family, managing the shop, being there for his community. But this was something new, something personal, something just for him. And that made it both thrilling and terrifying at once. Margaret, as she always did, was his steady anchor. She noticed the faraway look in his eyes as he sat at the kitchen table. "What's going on in that head of yours?" she asked, setting down her mug and sitting across from him. William looked at her, and for a moment, he hesitated. He had always been the practical one, the one who made decisions based on responsibility and what made the most sense. But this felt different. This was about doing something just for himself. He took a deep breath and slid the brochure across the table to her. "I'm thinking about signing up for that history course. The one from the university. The lifelong learning program." Margaret raised an eyebrow, surprised but pleased. "William, that's amazing. I didn't know you were even considering it. You've always talked about how much you love history." William's fingers traced the edge of the brochure, his heart beating faster as he spoke. "I know, but I don't know if it's a good idea. I mean, I'm not a young man anymore. I haven't been in a classroom in over 40 years. What if I can't keep up? What if I'm just too old to start something new like this? Margaret smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. I think you've already proven that age doesn't matter. You've fixed cars and kept the shop running for decades. You've raised a family. And now, it's time for you to follow something that's been inside you for all these years. It's never too late to do what you love, William. Her words, simple yet powerful, were like a balm to his doubts. William had spent so many years telling himself that it was too late, that his chance to chase his dreams had passed. But in this moment, with Margaret's support and the invitation still in front of him, he realized that the only thing holding him back was himself. The world wasn't telling him it was too late, he had been telling himself that. He looked at her, his eyes now shining with a sense of determination. You're right. I've spent enough time waiting for the right moment. Maybe there's no perfect time. Maybe now is the perfect time. Without another word, William picked up the phone. He dialed the number on the brochure, feeling a sense of nervous excitement as it rang. When the receptionist answered, William spoke with newfound conviction. Hi, I'd like to sign up for the history course. I'm ready to start. As he hung up the phone, he felt a wave of relief and exhilaration. He had done it. He had taken the first step toward reclaiming a piece of himself that had been buried under years of practicality, family obligations, and the steady flow of life. William knew there would still be doubts ahead, still moments when he questioned his decision. But for now, he felt proud of himself for choosing to go after what he had always wanted, for showing up for himself even at 68 years old. Margaret walked over, her eyes sparkling with pride. You did it. William smiled, his heart full. I did. I'm going to learn history. And for the first time in a long time, William felt like he was truly living again, alive with possibility, with a dream now within his reach. The first day of the course arrived with an early morning chill, a reminder that the seasons were changing. William stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt nervous about something like this. But today, he felt the weight of the unknown, the classrooms, the lectures, the students, and all the newness of stepping into a world he had long been away from. He glanced over at Margaret, who was getting ready for her own day. Well, I'm off to my first class, he said, trying to sound casual but feeling the flutter of uncertainty in his stomach. Margaret smiled, giving him a reassuring wink. Go get him, William. This is your time. When William arrived at the university, the campus was bustling with students of all ages, young people hurrying between classes, older adults like him taking their time. He felt out of place at first, as though he didn't belong, but when he walked into the history classroom, all those feelings of doubt faded. The room was filled with people, most of them older than he had expected, all there for the same reason, to learn. His instructor, a warm and enthusiastic woman in her mid-50s named Dr. Matthews, welcomed the class with a smile that put William at ease. She spoke with passion about ancient history, about the early civilizations that had shaped the world. As she spoke, William felt his heart race with excitement. The same spark that had driven him as a boy was back again, lighting up his mind as she shared the intricacies of ancient empires and the stories of long-forgotten people. The first lesson was about ancient Greece and the philosophers who had changed the course of human thought. William listened intently, soaking in every word. He found himself asking questions he hadn't dared to ask before. It didn't matter that he hadn't studied in so many years. He felt like a sponge, eager to absorb all the knowledge around him. Every fact, every theory, and every discussion felt like a rediscovery of the passion he'd once had. After class, he stayed behind to chat with some of the other students. To his surprise, he wasn't the only one who had put off pursuing a dream. A woman named Eleanor, a retired teacher, told him she had always wanted to study philosophy. Another student, Frank, had spent his career in business but had a lifelong love of history and had finally decided to dive in. They talked about their lives, their reasons for coming back to school, and the joy they felt being in an environment where age wasn't a barrier but a gift. William couldn't remember the last time he had felt so alive, so connected to something larger than himself. He had been so focused on work and family for so many years that he had forgotten what it felt like to learn for the sheer joy of it. It wasn't about grades or deadlines, it was about the pure thrill of discovery. As the weeks went by, William's excitement only grew. He immersed himself in his studies, poring over books and articles, visiting local museums to explore the artifacts he had read about in class. His passion for history had reignited with a force he hadn't expected, and he found himself sharing stories with Margaret in the evenings about the things he had learned that day. Margaret, ever supportive, was fascinated by his newfound enthusiasm. William also began attending local lectures and discussions on history, expanding his learning beyond the classroom. Every week, he would bring home new facts, theories, and stories that he was eager to share with anyone who would listen. The journey wasn't always easy. There were moments when he struggled with assignments or felt overwhelmed by the workload, but each challenge only fueled his determination. He had made the decision to pursue his dream, and he wasn't about to let age or difficulties stop him now. Every small victory felt like a triumph, and every class felt like another step towards something he had always wanted but never thought possible. One afternoon, as he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, reading about the Roman Empire, William couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He thought about the man he had been when he first opened the brochure, unsure of whether he was too old to begin something new. And now, here he was, fully immersed in a world of history he had only ever dreamed of. He looked at Margaret, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm glad I did this," he said softly. Margaret, her eyes warm, reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You've come alive again, William. I'm so proud of you." And for the first time in many years, William truly felt alive, embracing the journey he had once put on hold, knowing that it was never too late to follow your dreams. As the months passed, William's life began to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about the history he was learning, it was about the person he was becoming. The more he studied, the more he realized how much he had missed the thrill of discovery, the joy of learning something new, and the sense of fulfillment that came with chasing a passion he had long put on hold. He found himself waking up every day with a renewed sense of purpose. The world outside his window seemed a little brighter, his daily routines filled with more meaning. The history he had once only dreamed of studying now filled his thoughts, and his nights were spent researching, reading, and reflecting on the lessons he had learned in class. History was no longer a distant subject from his youth, it was now his lens through which he saw the world. One of the most profound changes was in his relationship with others. At first, William had attended the university class with a sense of hesitation, unsure if he belonged in a room full of students much younger than him. But soon, he realized that his experience and perspective were valuable assets. He found himself engaging in lively discussions with his classmates, offering insights from his life, which, in turn, added richness to the material they were studying. His wealth of real-world knowledge, his ability to connect historical events with their modern-day consequences, brought a new depth to the classroom conversations. Dr. Matthews, his instructor, began to recognize William's contributions. She often praised him for his unique insights and encouraged him to pursue more advanced coursework in history. "You have a gift for understanding the bigger picture, William," she told him one day after class. "I think you could really do something with your passion for this subject." That moment was a turning point. William had never considered himself someone who could make a significant impact in the academic world. But hearing Dr. Matthews' encouragement sparked something within him, something he had buried long ago, the belief that he was capable of more than he had allowed himself to imagine. Maybe, just maybe, he could contribute to history in a way he had never expected. As he continued his studies, William became more involved in the university's history department. He attended guest lectures, joined study groups, and began volunteering at local museums to help preserve artifacts. With each new experience, he felt his understanding of history deepen, but he also felt his own personal growth. He was no longer the man who worked in the auto shop, doing the same tasks day after day. He was now a student, a lifelong learner, shaping his own path. His relationship with Margaret also flourished during this time. She watched with admiration as he grew more animated, more passionate about his studies. She had always been supportive of his dreams, but now she could see how much this new chapter of his life had rekindled his spirit. They spent evenings discussing his lessons over dinner, sharing thoughts on historical events, and even planning future trips to historical sites. For the first time in many years, William and Margaret were dreaming together again. One afternoon, after class, William sat on a park bench overlooking the university's green lawns. He reflected on how much had changed since he had first picked up that brochure. He thought about the years he had spent telling himself that it was too late, the years he had spent doubting his ability to pursue his passions. And now, here he was, 68 years old, learning more than he had ever expected, feeling more fulfilled than he had in decades. William realized that the true reward of this journey wasn't just the knowledge he was gaining, but the person he was becoming, a man who had rediscovered his joy, his purpose, and his belief in himself. He was no longer burdened by the idea that it was too late. Instead, he had come to understand that it was never too late to grow, to change, to learn, and to live fully. In the months that followed, William continued to dive deeper into his studies, even enrolling in an advanced course that focused on European history. He found himself staying up late, poring over texts and engaging in debates with his classmates, hungry for more knowledge. But it wasn't just the facts that mattered, it was the process of growth itself. With each new lesson, William felt as though he was piecing together not just the past, but his own life, creating a tapestry of experiences and dreams that were now intertwined. He had found fulfillment in the most unexpected of places, in a classroom, in the turning of a page, in the discussions that now filled his life. And for the first time, William realized that his journey had only just begun. There was still so much to learn, so much to experience. As he walked across the campus one day, his thoughts turning to his next lesson, he smiled to himself. The world was full of stories of ancient civilizations, of distant lands, and of people who, like him, had dared to follow their dreams. And William Turner, at 68, was one of those people now. The end of the semester arrived faster than William had anticipated. It had been months since he first enrolled in the history course, and now, as he sat in the classroom for the final lecture, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Looking around at his classmates, he realized just how much he had grown. The man who had walked into this classroom with doubts about his age and ability was no longer the same person who sat here today. The journey had not been without its challenges. There were times when William questioned his decision, especially during moments of exhaustion or doubt. But he had pushed through, and now he was reaping the rewards of his hard work, his determination, and his willingness to embrace the unknown. This wasn't just about earning a grade, it was about reclaiming a dream he had held onto for most of his life. The final lecture was about the Renaissance, a period of history that had always fascinated William. As Dr. Matthews spoke with her usual enthusiasm, William found himself hanging on every word, as if this was the most important lesson of all. The Renaissance wasn't just a subject for him, it symbolized the rebirth of his own passion. The world of history, which had once felt so distant, was now deeply woven into the fabric of his daily life. As class ended, Dr. Matthews handed back the final projects. William's project, a detailed analysis of the Renaissance's impact on modern society, had received high marks, but what mattered most to him wasn't the grade. It was the knowledge that he had come so far, both in terms of the course material and his personal growth. After the final class, William stood outside the university, looking up at the building where he had spent so many hours learning and reflecting. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the campus. He had made it. He had followed his dream, and in the process, he had created a new life for himself. A life filled with purpose, curiosity, and a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in years. Margaret was waiting for him in the car. When she saw him approaching, she could tell by the look on his face that something had changed. "How was it?" she asked, her voice soft with anticipation. William smiled, a wide, genuine smile that radiated pride. "It was incredible. I'm proud of myself. I've learned more than I ever thought I would." As he got into the car, he felt a surge of emotion. This journey had been about so much more than just history. It had been about reclaiming the parts of himself that had been dormant for years, the curiosity, the drive, and the belief that it was never too late to follow a dream. "I never thought I'd feel like this again," William said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. "I always thought that after I retired, it would be just about relaxing, you know? But this has been more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined." Margaret reached out and squeezed his hand. "You've proved that it's never too late to start something new." "I'm so proud of you, William." As they drove home, William reflected on the path he had taken. What started as a simple decision to enroll in a course had turned into a life-altering experience. He had rediscovered his love for learning, but more importantly, he had rediscovered himself. The past few months had shown him that dreams don't have an expiration date. It wasn't just about completing a course or earning a degree, it was about living life fully, no matter the stage of life you were in. The next week, William went to his local library to attend a lecture on Renaissance art, one of many he planned to attend in the future. He also began volunteering at a local historical society, sharing his newfound knowledge with others and contributing to the preservation of history in his community. William knew that his journey hadn't ended. In many ways, it had just begun. He had reached his dream, but there were still many more dreams to explore. History had always been a part of him, but now, it was woven into the very essence of who he was. And at 68 years old, he was still learning, still growing, and still chasing the passions that had always been a part of him. As the weeks passed, William's story began to spread, not just among his classmates, but also within his community. People who knew him, the locals, his old friends, and even people who had worked with him at the shop, began to notice the change. There was a light in his eyes now, a spark of passion that hadn't been there before. It was the kind of spark that didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, as William was working in his garden, an old friend named Michael stopped by. Michael, a retired mechanic who had worked with William at the shop for years, leaned over the fence and grinned. "Hey, William! I've been hearing all about you. You're turning into quite the history buff, huh?" William chuckled, wiping his hands on his pants. "Yeah, I guess you could say that. It's something I've always wanted to do, but I never had the time until now. Michael shook his head in disbelief. I never thought I'd see the day you'd trade a wrench for a history book. But I gotta admit, you've inspired me. Maybe it's time for me to finally take that woodworking class I've been talking about for years. The comment caught William off guard, but it filled him with a sense of pride. Michael, the same man who had spent his life turning wrenches and fixing cars, was now thinking about his own dreams. It wasn't just about history or learning, it was about the spark of possibility that William had ignited in others. I think it's never too late for anything, William said, with a knowing smile. Life doesn't stop just because you retire or get older. If there's something you've always wanted to do, go for it. Michael nodded thoughtfully, the words clearly resonating with him. You're right. Maybe it's time I stopped making excuses. Later that week, William received an unexpected phone call from his former neighbor, Marlene, who lived across the street. She was a widow who had always been reserved and kept to herself after her husband passed away. They had exchanged polite greetings over the years, but never much more. When she spoke to William on the phone, her voice was warm but a little hesitant. William, she began, I've been thinking about what you've done, going back to school, pursuing something you've always wanted. It's really got me thinking. I've been meaning to join the local art club for ages, but I've been too shy to go. I just don't know if I'm good enough. But after hearing about your history classes, I thought maybe it's time to give it a try. William smiled as he heard the hope in Marlene's voice. Marlene, it's never too late to start something new. I promise you, you don't have to be perfect. Just take that first step. You never know where it'll take you. Marlene was quiet for a moment, and then she chuckled softly. You're right, William. Maybe I'll go check it out next week. Thank you. A week later, William saw Marlene walking by with a small bag of art supplies in her hand. She waved to him with a big smile on her face, her eyes shining with excitement. William waved back, his heart swelling with pride. In the months that followed, William's story continued to inspire those around him. More and more people in the neighborhood began taking small steps toward their own dreams. People who had put off learning new skills, traveling, or pursuing old passions found the courage to begin. William's actions had created a ripple effect in his community, showing others that it was never too late to chase your dreams, no matter how old you were. One evening, at the local library, William gave a lecture about the history of ancient Rome, something he had studied extensively in his course. The room was full of local residents, some older than him, others much younger. William spoke with enthusiasm about the empire's history, its political structures, and its lasting impact on the modern world. As he spoke, he noticed the rapt attention of the crowd. They were hanging on his every word, not just because of the subject matter, but because of the passion with which he spoke. After the lecture, several people came up to him, thanking him for the insight he had shared. But what struck William the most was what one young woman said. Your story, how you started learning at 68, how you went after what you've always wanted, has really inspired me. It's made me realize that I don't have to wait to live my dream. I can start right now. That was the moment William realized the full extent of his journey. It wasn't just about his own personal growth or achieving his own dream. It was about how his decision to follow his passion had inspired others to do the same. His story wasn't just one of personal achievement, it had become a catalyst for change in the lives of those around him. As he left the library that evening, walking with Margaret by his side, William reflected on all the people whose lives had been touched by his decision. He had found fulfillment, yes, but he had also helped others find their own paths, showing them that age didn't have to limit their potential. William smiled to himself as they walked home, the sky turning dark above them. "It's never too late," he said quietly. Margaret squeezed his hand, her voice full of pride. "No, it's not." And in that moment, William understood that the true reward of following his dreams wasn't just achieving them, it was in the way they inspired others to believe in their own possibilities. As winter gave way to spring, William found himself in a reflective mood. The seasons were changing, just as he had. It had been nearly a year since he had taken that first step into the classroom, unsure of what the future held. Now, as he sat on his back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the birds flutter around the garden, he realized how much his life had transformed. He had achieved something monumental in his life. He had followed a dream that, for decades, seemed out of reach. But in doing so, he had also discovered something deeper, that the journey of learning and growing wasn't confined to a specific moment. It was a lifelong adventure, one that could take him in directions he never expected. His studies were far from over. William had already begun planning his next steps. Although he had completed his first history course, he wasn't ready to stop there. He enrolled in additional courses, branching out into topics he had always been fascinated by, like archaeology and ancient art. The more he learned, the more he realized how much he still didn't know, and that was exciting. But it wasn't just about formal education anymore. He had come to understand that learning was a constant process, something that happened every day, whether he was reading a book, engaging in conversation, or simply observing the world around him. He felt more alive than ever before. In fact, he had begun to dream about something else, something even bigger. William had always loved the idea of traveling to historical sites around the world. There were places like Rome, Athens, and Cairo that had fascinated him for years. Now, he was determined to visit them, not just as a tourist, but as someone who truly understood the history that lay behind the ruins and ancient buildings. The idea of standing in the shadow of the Colosseum, walking along the streets of Athens, and exploring the Great Pyramids of Giza filled him with a sense of wonder. Margaret had always been supportive of his dreams, but she had her own aspirations as well. As they discussed the future, the idea of traveling together became something they both looked forward to. They began planning trips to destinations they had always dreamed of, exploring the possibility of combining William's academic interests with the joy of discovering the world's most iconic historical landmarks. "I can't believe we're finally doing this," Margaret said one evening, as they sat at the kitchen table with a map spread out between them. They had just mapped out their first trip to Italy, where they would explore Roman history and architecture. William smiled, a feeling of contentment filling his chest. "It feels surreal, doesn't it? But it's happening. We're going to see the world and experience it in a way we never imagined." The more they planned, the more excited William became about what the future held. He realized that this journey he had begun was just one chapter of a much bigger story. There was so much left to discover, so much to experience, and so much to learn. The idea that age could limit him felt more absurd every day. And it wasn't just about travel and education. William had come to understand that fulfillment wasn't something you reached in the traditional sense. It wasn't a final destination. Fulfillment was about the pursuit itself, the ongoing process of growing, learning, and living. Whether it was through his history courses, his travels, or simply engaging with the people in his life, William realized that life was meant to be lived fully, no matter your age. He also knew that his story had inspired others to pursue their own dreams, and that was something he took great pride in. But he had never expected it to feel so deeply rewarding. The connections he had made, the experiences he had shared, and the lessons he had learned all came together in a beautiful tapestry of a life well lived. William stood up, stretching his legs after sitting for so long. He looked out over the garden, where the flowers were beginning to bloom. The world was awakening, just as he had. There was still so much to explore, so much to do, and so many new dreams to follow. As he turned to Margaret, who was now looking through a travel brochure, he couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the opportunities he had seized, for the courage to chase what had always seemed impossible, and for the life he was living now, a life full of purpose, wonder, and possibility. "It's never too late," he said, his voice filled with conviction. Margaret smiled up at him, her eyes sparkling. "No, it's not." And with that, they both looked toward the future, toward the new adventures, new lessons, and new dreams that awaited them. Together. As the years went by, William found himself spending more time in quiet reflection. He was still as passionate about history as ever. His library of books had grown, his studies had deepened, and his travels had taken him to places he had once only dreamed of. But now, as he sat in his favorite chair in the living room, a sense of peace had settled over him. He had lived a life of purpose, a life that had been transformed by the pursuit of a dream he thought was beyond his reach. His life was no longer about checking off goals or proving something to others. It was about savoring the moments, appreciating the journey, and realizing that the pursuit of knowledge, curiosity, and joy had not only enriched his life but had also inspired others along the way. One day, as he and Margaret sat on their porch, enjoying the quiet beauty of a late spring afternoon, William couldn't help but reflect on the impact his journey had had, not just on himself, but on those around him. Over the years, he had shared his story with many friends, neighbors, even strangers who had crossed his path. He had seen how his decision to pursue his passion had inspired others to take their own first steps toward their dreams. People who had once felt stuck, unsure, or too old to start something new, had been given the courage to begin. "I've thought a lot about legacy lately," William said, his voice calm and thoughtful. "I always thought that legacy was about big accomplishments, things that were grand or monumental. But now I see it differently. It's about the small things, the ways you can touch the lives of others, even in ways you don't realize at the time." Margaret smiled softly, her hand gently resting on his. "You've touched so many lives, William. You've shown people that it's never too late, that it's always possible to chase what's in your heart." William thought about the people he had inspired over the years. Michael, his old mechanic friend, who had started his woodworking classes and now had his own small business making handcrafted furniture. Marlene, who had taken up painting and was now selling her work at local art fairs. His neighbors, his classmates, even some of the students in his history courses, all of them had been touched by his example. William had become more than just a student or a retiree. He had become a beacon of possibility, proof that it was never too late to follow a dream. But it wasn't just about inspiring others, it was also about the legacy he was leaving within his own family. William had always shared his passion for history with his children and grandchildren. Over the years, he had taken them on trips to museums, ancient ruins, and historical sites. They had listened as he told stories of the past, sharing his love for learning with the next generation. His children had watched as their father, once content in his routine, had reawakened his curiosity and passion for life. One evening, his son, David, called him. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you've done," he said. "I can't believe you went back to school, traveled the world, and shared your passion for history with so many people. It's incredible. You've taught me something important, not just about history, but about life. I want to be more like you." I want to follow my passions and not wait around until it's too late." William smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "You've always had your own passions, David. All you have to do is follow them, just like I did." David laughed. "Thanks, Dad. You've really shown me what it means to live fully." As William hung up the phone, he thought about how deeply this conversation had affected him. He had always believed that his actions and choices would leave a mark on the world, but it wasn't until now that he understood how much his legacy would be rooted in the people he had inspired, especially his family. His grandchildren, too, had been influenced by his journey. When they visited, they often asked him questions about the places he had been and the things he had learned. They loved hearing about the history of ancient Rome or the pyramids of Egypt, and they saw their grandfather not just as a storyteller, but as someone who had lived a life of purpose. They admired his dedication to learning and his belief that the world was full of stories waiting to be discovered. One evening, while sitting around the dinner table with his children and grandchildren, William shared a thought that had been on his mind. "I've realized something recently. The most important thing isn't the things you accumulate in life, or the places you visit, or even the accomplishments you achieve. It's about how you live each day, how you stay curious, and how you inspire others to do the same. That's what leaves a legacy. That's what lasts." His granddaughter, Emma, who was in her late teens, looked at him with wide eyes. "Grandpa, you've already left a huge legacy. You've shown us that it's never too late to follow your dreams." William's heart swelled with pride. In that moment, he understood that his journey wasn't just about what he had achieved personally, it was about the way his actions had rippled out, influencing his family and community in ways he never expected. As the years passed, William continued to learn, to travel, and to inspire others. His life had been a testament to the power of pursuing one's passions, no matter when that passion is discovered. And as he grew older, he found himself more at peace than ever before, knowing that he had lived a life that had touched the hearts and minds of those around him. He had never thought much about legacy when he was younger, but now, in his later years, he realized that the legacy he would leave was not in the things he had done for himself, but in the way he had helped others believe in their own potential. His legacy was a quiet, enduring one, a legacy of hope, inspiration, and the unwavering belief that it is never too late to start living fully.